Welcome back to NVC Dudes. Today I'm Jamie Prieto. Hey, Brian. Hey, Cory.
Hey, guys. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so we were talking about, Cory, you were talking about your experiences being a black man in New York City. And where should we take the conversation next? We talked about, police and real change that we want. There's a metaphor of the Monopoly game. And creating safe spaces for people to fully express themselves and to translate, whatever judgments might be into heart energy, to feelings and needs.
I've been a part of a few podcasts and conversations over the last month in regards to what's been going on in the world with George Floyd and the protests. And I'm feeling like this is a great time for people to express themselves in what I would call, I didn't call it this, it's more of an NVC, Nonviolent Communication term, but scary honesty of people sitting around in a circle together and saying, hey, I didn't know that this was going on, or I know that this is going on and I'm angry about it and I feel like it's going to continue to go on. And to have a space, what I call a safe space, to really express ourselves authentically, even though, there's always that idea of like, what are people going to think of me? And there's another piece to this too that I want to speak to because I think it's important. Where those who feel somehow complicit in the status quo and may even term themselves or consider themselves racist, I think it's important that we're all in the conversation, particularly those people. Because when we're talking about exacting change, it's not gonna work in isolation. It's not gonna work for me to be in a room with people that at the end of the day, I agree solely with. It's gonna be in having those difficult conversations from people, all walks of life, and willing to open themselves up and say, hey, I've benefited from white privilege. I recognize, or I'm scared. I don't even see this thing called systemic racism as a white person. Can you help me understand this? All of these pieces of the pie are important.
Yeah, and you're sort of touching on a part of me that's kind of a passion, that's in restorative justice. So
Yeah.
How do we, instead of throwing rocks at each other or shooting each other and punishing each other, let's find a place where we can have dialogue that has a potential for restoration, for restoring harmony and restoring some kind of contract, maybe co-creating a contract, a social contract that works for everybody.
Yeah. And where I've seen that work is with, I may mispronounce his last name, but his name is Edwin Rutsch. And he does something called empathy circles. And he goes to political rallies. And he'll sit down with one person of one party and person of the other party. And he uses empathy as a platform in which people can hear one another. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is really great. This is encouraging me. So I'm seeing different technologies where that can happen. The caveat being people being open and receptive to that kind of thing versus being drugged to it and, and pulling teeth. That doesn't really work.
Right.
So my sense is that if we have people that are open and willing, even though it's scary, I think we can get some momentum. I'm going to be a part of some conversations. And a matter of fact, right before I got online with you, there was a rally downtown Los Angeles here through Black Lives Matter. And they were, speaking and talking about some things that can happen in terms of action. And so I'm just a big believer in, I realize at a time like this, it's very easy for people to take their corner, and feel perhaps defensive or scared. But if we're talking about systematic change here, it's talking about getting in a room with people that we don't necessarily look like or may not even agree with, and being willing to share our souls.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for adding that. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I like this thread that we're on with this idea of like strategies and what do we do? Like, what is the best approach to move forward? And I love the idea of the empathy circles. I love the idea of having good conversations. But then on the other side of that spectrum, I mean, we've got people that are really just wanting to express this anger and this frustration, and in whatever way that takes, whether it's, holding up a sign or tearing down a statue or whatever it is that they've got to express this.
Yeah.
How do we accept that that's where they're at, and I don't know, like bring them into a conversation that's a little more, I guess, maybe would bear more fruit.
Yeah. And going back to what I said earlier, is this idea of honoring the anger. And I think for many, it might be, our defenses or my defenses go up. I'll give you an example. I was in an elevator, and I remember that there was a woman in the elevator with me, and I could see her sort of clutch her purse closer to her. And what the interesting thing was, guys, is that I was scared because she was scared. And so those things, for some people, they're like, wow, that happened to you? And it's like, as a black man, I don't have enough fingers to tell you how many times things like that happen, or because I'm treated differently because of the color of my skin. So I think having spaces where that can be expressed, where people's, because, there's two ways to go with this, and particularly as a black.
Can I connect with that fear a little bit? Just want to acknowledge, when you're in that elevator with, and you felt scared, guessing, was that like around your need for safety and maybe something around allowing yourself to be yourself? I don't know. It sounds like there's some discomfort there.
Also acceptance. I think it had to do with acceptance and understanding that I'm equal.
Yeah.
Yes.
To be afraid of me.
Equity, right?
You're
that mutuality of matter.
Mutuality there. Yeah. And so I just think that there's an opportunity to answer your question, Brian. What do we do with it? For me, it's about having spaces where we can express ourselves authentically. And just as a plug, I'm participating in a course through the New York Center for Nonviolent Communication that actually starts tomorrow, which is called the Compassion Course. And what it is, it's a year-long course where online you get these little emails, and it teaches and shares about this technology of expressing compassion and being able to honor our anger and being able to, there's like a spectrum of emotions as a human being that I have. And it's beyond just sad and mad and happy and glad. And this course really, at least for me, I've taken it 5 years in a row. And it's fantastic because it allows me to practice the skill of when I was in that elevator and after I got out, being able to say to myself, wow, I'm really frustrated right now. I have a need for respect. I have a need for being seen. If I hadn't taken something like the compassion course or practiced these skills in nonviolent consciousness, it would be very hard for me to get to that conversation. And I'm really sad, gentlemen, because I can only imagine people that go through what I just shared with you with the elevator who don't have that. Right. Where do they take that? And so oftentimes we either implode or explode. And a lot of times neither is healthy. So the question is, how can we have healthier ways of holding the angst, holding the frustration? Because it's important to be able to express it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And process it.
Yeah.
And there's a skill, there's a, like a discipline. It's almost like, learning a new language or learning how to play an instrument. Because I wasn't born with this stuff, I had to learn it as an adult. I wasn't taught this, compassionate communication or nonviolent communication in school. So I had to learn it as an adult. And you also touched on a point that, you can't force this stuff on people. And that's what I was mentioning in the, training police. And you can't take someone and force them to learn this kind of consciousness. Yeah. They have to sort of resonate with it initially in order for the training to land, but you can't force people to take this training. And so there's that openness, like we talked about earlier. There needs to be some kind of openness to outcome, so that connection can take place. Otherwise, it's just another power over authoritarian, thing that's used violently against people. So.
Right. And if I want to speak a little bit about what I would call the elephant in the room. That's a piece of this that Kimberly Jones spoke about, the activist whose video I think has millions of views right now, is that, when we talk about systemic racism, there's a component with regards to capitalism and the structures, the certain power structures that we have in society that in many ways sort of condone separation. They condone disconnect. They condone here are the haves and here are the have-nots. Yes. And so I think it's a real critical time for us to look at the structure overall in which we live our lives and ask ourselves the question, okay, is this system that I'm seeing here helping with change for the better, or is it merely perpetuating segregation, inequality, and things of that nature? So it's important.
Yeah, and our ability as a society to look at what we've built and decide whether or not it's something that needs to be replaced or retooled, or how do we find better strategies to get equality and things like that. I think people just kind of get used to the fact that this is the way things are. Like we have a tiered hierarchy when it comes to power and influence and money, and there's sort of this. At least I can speak for me. It's like, well, what do I do about this? Is such a bigger thing than I am. Like, what can I possibly do? I feel so helpless.
Yeah.
So, powerless. Like, what can I do?
Yeah, and just I want to sort of, I guess, focus, because when I hear static labels, again going back to the dangers of static labels and generalizations.
Yeah.
And, what is it that we're talking about? Like capitalism, we don't have pure capitalism in this country. Let's just call it out. There's, in a strictly capitalist society, when, if you run out of money, you go bankrupt. And right now we have kind of a welfare system that bails out large corporations when there's some kind of a problem. So again, there's something about moving past the labels and then talk about specific observable behavior, which it also is something that NVC invites. Because those generalizations have a tendency to polarize people and scare, and so we lose that ability to connect around. Well, what are the real issues that we're talking about? And this whole pandemic is a perfect example. Where I see people in power getting the best medical care and the testing and all of that, and it took a while for that testing to actually percolate down to regular folks.
So I see that in two ways, Jamie, because I hear what you're saying, how creating a label can create people feeling defensive and things like that. And then there's also this Kimberly Crenshaw is this activist and speaker, and she spoke about the idea that you can't fix what you won't face. And one of the things that I got a lot out of is that days after the murder of George Floyd and that the video started gaining traction and people started noticing it, is that this concept of really people looking at the phrase Black Lives Matter. And that's a label, and that's static. And yet it was important that we look at it and that we sit with it and that we're uncomfortable with it and that we have those discussions where people say, well, what about all lives matter? And that can be true. And at the same time, Black Lives Matter can also be true. So I hear what you're saying. And I also think it can be instructive when we're able to look at things and say, okay, at some point we're going to have to transcend this because it is about humanity getting along together. And right now, the pain point, the hemorrhaging is on Black lives.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And thanks for bringing that up. And there is a place for labels, so long as we're clear on what it is that, you know, we're talking about and connecting with. And you're right, you know, this work, Black Lives Matter is calling out a pain point right now in our society. My needs for justice aren't met, because I want, you know, everyone's needs to matter, including Black lives. And right now there is a problem, a systemic problem of you know, oppression, especially in the police force and economically, around Black Lives Matter. So wonder if this is a good little nugget to encapsulate in another episode. Does this sound like a good pausing point?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for me.
All right. Good conversation, guys. Thanks.